Let's go a bit more into the details of the different type of learning. In this lesson, we will understand what does it mean to talk about supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning. What is supervised learning? In a supervised learning setting, the model is created by learning the relationship input-output using labeled output. Let's make an example about it. We want to develop, for example, a machine learning system that recognizes spam emails. Our input data are emails. Our output data is a label that categorizes an email as spam or not spam. In a supervised learning setting, the training is done by providing the learning algorithms with example of email labeled as spam and email labeled as non-spam. Which are the business use cases for supervised learning? Predicting client churn. What does it mean? This is the case when clients leave their phone company or their bank. And this is an important business case for supervised learning because they need to know in advance if there are actions they can take in order to retain the client. Another business use case is classify. Another business use case is to classify customer based on how likely they are going to repay their own loan. And this is important business case for banks. For example, another business case is to predict how many patients an hospital will need to serve in a time period. You can imagine in a period like the past pandemics, this application is very fundamental. We can also predict how likely someone is going to click on an online advertising, and this is a business that Google does a lot. We can also predict the call volume in call center for staffing decision and shaping the workforce in call centers. Other business case can be predicted power usage in electrical distribution grids. This will help to optimize resources inside the electrical distribution grid. We can detect fraudulent activity in credit card transaction, forecast product demand and inventory level. This is something that Amazon does a lot. We can also predict, for example, the price of cars based on their characteristics. This is not something that a final user wants to do, but car manufacturers use a lot this business case in order to give a price range of their models. We can also predict the probability that the patient joins an healthcare program, and this is very interesting for insurance company. And predict whether registered users will be willing or not to pay a particular price for a product. This is what is called dynamic pricing. Let's delve a bit more now on the other strategy, unsupervised learning. I'm to learn pattern and structure in data without the use of explicit label or a predefined output. Unsupervised learning aims to uncover hidden relationship and intrinsic property within the input data and is able to discover groups of patterns inside the dataset. Let's check an example of unsupervised learning. Imagine we want to develop a machine learning system that characterizes the purchasing behavior of clients on an e-commerce website. Unsupervised learning enables to identify distinct group of customers based on similarity, like, for example, the visiting pattern of the website or the buying habits of the customers. With this, unsupervised learning can provide insight into customer segmentation that will enable to drive personalized marketing strategy for the different groups of the customers. Which are the business case for unsupervised learning? Of course, we said, and this is one of the most important, to segment customers into groups by distinct characteristics. We can also segment employees based on the likelihood of attrition, which means people that are likely to leave the company soon. We can also cluster customers based on their usage of loyalty cards. Very famous business case for unsupervised learning is recommend movies based on what other customer has seen. We can also use unsupervised learning to recommend news articles, and reader may want to read based on the previous reading. We can also detect patterns, for example, in the spreading of disease of pandemics. We can recommend next best product for groups, for example, for groups of customer. And another important application is to predict brain tumor progression, also because in that case, we have no label for use. As a third option, we mentioned reinforcement learning. And reinforcement learning enables an agent to learn and to make decisions through the interaction with the environment. Notice that instead of the word software, module, or system, I've used the word agent in reinforcement learning because reinforcement learning mostly refers to something that interacts with the physical or the virtual environment, as we have seen in the definition of artificial intelligence. Reinforcement learning deals with learning from feedback. And the feedback is provided in form of rewards or punishment to maximize the long-term reward to achieve the task. Let's give an example of reinforcement learning. For example, imagine we want to create a computer program that plays chess. With reinforcement learning, the program learns from experience, exploring different moves, and it optimizes the policy based on the reward. Using repeated interaction and training, the computer program can become very much proficient chess player, making strategic decisions and learning to win against the opponent. Which are the business use case for reinforcement learning? One very important business case is to optimize the trading strategy for an option trading portfolio, stock market, very important. Another application is to balance the load of electricity grids based on the different demand cycle during night, day, winter, summer. We can also stock and pick inventory using robots, application that is very well used, for example, Amazon. We can optimize, indeed, using reinforcement learning, the driving behavior of self-driving cars, still an open problem that has not been solved yet. We can optimize the pricing in real time, for example, online action with products with limited supply. To summarize, what we have learned today is that there exists mostly three learning strategies. Supervised learning uses labels to learn the association between the inputs and the output. Unsupervised learning uses similarities between inputs data to discover group and cluster in the data. Finally, reinforcement learning uses rewards to associate good inputs to the successful completion of a task.